The lights of the Stretford End didn't just illuminate a football pitch, they lit up a stage for a man who played like an angel while living like a ghost. Pelé called him the greatest, but to the world, George Best was the first true rock star of the beautiful game. A man who conquered the summit of sport at 22 and spent the rest of his life wondering where it all went. This is the story of a boy who could dance through a minefield without ever touching a tripwire. A genius who broke the hearts of defenders and himself in equal measure. To understand the lightning, you have to understand the sky it came from. It is 1961 in the Cregagh Estate of East Belfast. The air is thick with the industrial scent of coal smoke, the ozone of an impending Irish storm, and the rhythmic, metallic thud-thud-thud of a ball hitting a gable wall. A scout named Bob Bishop stands on the sidelines of a local youth match, his coat collar turned up against the wind, watching a boy who looks like he's made of glass. This boy is scrawny, his jersey hangs off his shoulders like a sail on a calm day, and his socks are perpetually bunched around his ankles. But then, the ball arrives. The moment it touches his boot, the muddy, grey world of Belfast seems to shift into high definition. He doesn't just control the ball, he adopts it. He glides over the waterlogged patches of grass that trap other players like quicksand. Bishop doesn't wait for the final whistle. He rushes to a local post office, his hands shaking as he scrawls a telegram to Manchester United manager Matt Busby. It read, "I think I've found you a genius." But genius is often accompanied by a fragile heart. When 15-year-old George first stepped off the ferry in Manchester, the city felt like a monster. The towering chimneys, the roar of the traffic, and the cold, impersonal sprawl of the boarding houses were too much. Within 24 hours, the genius had fled. He ran back to the safety of his mother's kitchen and the red brick terraces of Cregagh. It took the soft-spoken, fatherly warmth of Matt Busby to convince him to return, a conversation that changed the course of sporting history. If George hadn't stepped back onto that boat, the world would have never known the magic of the number 7. By September 1963, the whispers in the Manchester pubs had turned into a shout. George made his debut against West Bromwich Albion at just 17 years old. The atmosphere at Old Trafford was electric, a sea of flat caps and heavy overcoats in the damp autumn air. When George walked out, he looked like a poet among blacksmiths. His hair was long and dark, falling into eyes that saw gaps in the defence that no one else could see. The defenders that day were hard men. These were players who wore boots like iron weights and tackled with the intent to hurt. They tried to bully him. They lunged with studs-up challenges meant to rattle the teenager's bones. But George was a ghost. He had this unique double-jointed way of shifting his weight, a shimmy of the hips that made him appear to be in two places at once. He would stop the ball dead on the touchline, wait for the defender to commit his life to a tackle, and then simply vanish. He didn't just beat them, he humiliated them with a cheeky grin. By the end of the match, the Stretford End wasn't just cheering, they were in awe. They knew they weren't just watching a player, they were watching an era begin. By the mid-1960s, Britain was shedding its grey skin. The Beatles were at the top of the charts, fashion was exploding in Carnaby Street, and George Best was the face of it all. Before George, footballers were seen as humble tradesmen who caught the bus to the stadium. George changed the DNA of the sport. He was the first player to have an agent, the first to have a boutique, and the first to have teenage girls screaming at him like he was a movie star. He was the 5th Beatle, but this wasn't just about the long hair and the sharp suits. On the pitch, George was doing things that felt impossible. This was an era where defenders were allowed to literally assault you. They would fly in with studs-up lunges on pitches that looked like ploughed fields. George didn't just survive it, he turned it into theatre. He had this uncanny ability to sense a tackle coming before it happened. He would skip over a challenge, leave a defender face down in the mud, and look back with a cheeky grin. He was playing a different game than everyone else. The night George Best became a god was March 9, 1966. Manchester United travelled to the Estadio da Luz to face the mighty Benfica. In the 1960s, Benfica was a fortress. They had Eusebio, the Black Panther, and they hadn't lost a home European tie in years. The Portuguese sun had baked the pitch hard, and the stadium was a cauldron of 75,000 screaming fans. Matt Busby's instructions were simple. Keep it tight, don't concede in the first 20 minutes. George didn't just ignore the instructions, he tore them up. Within 12 minutes, he had scored twice. The first was a brave header, his slight frame rising between giants. The second was pure, unadulterated Best. He picked up the ball, slalomed through 3 defenders as if they were training cones, and fired the ball into the corner with a clinical coldness. United won 5-1. The Portuguese press, mesmerized by the destruction, dubbed him El Beatle. When the plane touched down in Manchester, the scene was madness. Thousands of fans swarmed the tarmac. George stepped off the stairs wearing a massive, flamboyant sombrero and a wide grin. In that moment, the shy boy from Belfast died, and the world's first celebrity footballer was born. He was the bridge between the working-class roots of the game and the neon-lit world of pop stardom. The emotional soul of George's career arrived in 1968. For Manchester United, this wasn't just a game, it was a resurrection. 10 years earlier, the Munich air disaster had claimed the lives of the Busby babes. Matt Busby had carried that grief every day since. Winning the European Cup was the only way to heal the scar. The final was at Wembley against Benfica. The tension was so thick you could taste the salt in the air. It was 1-1 as the match bled into extra time. The players were staggering, their lungs burning, their legs heavy as lead. Then came the moment. A long ball, a flick on, and George was through. Time seemed to freeze. He rounded the goalkeeper with a movement so fluid it looked like silk, left him sitting on the grass and rolled the ball into the yawning net. The roar that followed was a decade in the making. United went on to win 4-1. That night, George won the European Cup and later the Ballon d'Or. At 22, he was the king of the world. He had everything: beauty, fame, wealth, and a talent that bordered on the divine. But at the top of the mountain, George found himself alone. While the world saw the glamour, a quiet tragedy was unfolding back in Belfast. George's mother Anne was a woman of immense pride and athletic talent herself. But as George's fame became a monster, the pressure on the family became unbearable. The press camped on their doorstep. Every move they made was scrutinized. Anne began to turn to alcohol to cope with the anxiety and the loss of her quiet life. There is a haunting symmetry in their stories. While George was being toasted with the finest champagne in London's most exclusive clubs, his mother was losing her battle with the same demon in the grey rain of Belfast. George later felt a crushing weight of guilt, believing that his success had inadvertently destroyed the woman who raised him. It was a private grief that no amount of trophies could ever soothe. The decline didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, agonizing erosion. After 1968, the great United team began to crumble. George felt the weight of being the sole entertainer. The fifth Beatle persona became a prison. He couldn't go for a walk or sit in a park without being mobbed. He started to hide. He would stay in darkened apartments for days, the floor littered with empty bottles, while the world wondered where he was. He famously said, "I spent a lot of money on booze, birds, and fast cars. The rest I just squandered." It was a line meant to make people laugh, but it was a cry for help. He was a man who wanted to be loved but couldn't handle being watched. He started missing training, not out of arrogance, but out of a paralyzing inability to face the expectations. When he finally left United at 27, it felt like the air had been sucked out of Old Trafford. He became a nomad, a traveling circus of genius. He played in America for the Los Angeles Aztecs, where he scored wonder goals in the afternoon and disappeared into the bars of the Sunset Strip. He played in Hong Kong, South Africa, and for tiny clubs in Scotland. He was a master painter who had lost his brushes, but was still creating art with his bare hands.
The end of George Best's life was a public tragedy, played out on the front pages of the very tabloids that had built him up. But the world never stopped loving him. When he fell ill in 2005, a vigil began. His final message, that haunting image in the hospital bed with the caption, "Don't die like me," was his most selfless act. He wanted his life to mean something more than just goals. When George died, Belfast didn't just mourn, it stood still. 50,000 people stood in the pouring rain to see his coffin pass. They didn't remember the headlines, they remembered the dark-haired boy who made the impossible look easy. They remembered the way he would lose his boot in a tackle and keep running, scoring with a bare foot. George Best was a reminder that perfection is fleeting. He was a man who lived 1,000 lives in 59 years, a man who gave us a glimpse of what it looks like when a human being truly masters their craft. He was a flawed, beautiful, and eternal legend. As they say in Belfast, Maradona good, Pelé better, George Best. George Best once said that his greatest regret was not being able to play for Northern Ireland in a World Cup. If George had played on the world stage today, with modern medicine and protection, do you think he would have eclipsed Messi and Ronaldo? Give me your honest thoughts in the comments. This story is part of our mission to keep the game's history alive.